Hey, what's going on, guys? No, I'm late to the party on this, but figured I'd give my take on the new Slayer class and maybe provide a perspective that might not have been discussed, but of course we'll see and you let me know in the comment. But essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to break this down and see what Slayer has to offer and the things that might be hidden in the trailer. And so the first thing we see are the normal attacks. Nothing special, and to be completely honest, the normal attacks, whether it's going to be gun mode or slash mode, is probably going to be one of the weak points of Slayer, and we'll get into why that might be later. But I stopped the video here because this is the first thing that we want to focus on, and that is this gun twirl animation. I'm going to slow down to 50% speed. That twirl that goes into a charge. Now, what is going on here? What is I think is going on here? I'm going to be using a lot of Luster terminology because, believe it or not, Slayer is basically Luster, except much more toned down, giving NGS does not have that craziness that Luster could do in PSO2 base. But outside of that, they share a lot of similarities. So what do I think this is? I'm going to slow this down a little bit more. This is what would be referred to for Luster as either swift or quick shoot. So of course, depending on if you're playing Global or Japan, that name changes. But essentially, quick shoot, after shooting normal attacks, you would get access to another ability. Now in NGS, this ability is a charge function. When we charge it halfway, you get kind of that rapid shoot. But when we fully charge, as we're going to see coming up, we get a longer charge and just a full blast. Now, I'm pausing right here because what I want you to pay attention to is this animation. You might be asking yourself why. Because this animation is actually going to show itself in a future clip. But of course I'll call that out, but pay attention to this. And I'm calling this quick shoot just for, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Of course, will it be quick shoot when they release it? Who knows? So of course we see the normal attacks, charge, and the quick shoot. Sword normals, once again, similar to the gun normals, really don't think they're all that great. We'll get into why I think that's probably on purpose one of the weak points. Now, we get into the first PA. This has two forms, once again borrowing from Luster, that being move art and stay art. For those who might not be familiar, Luster had the ability that it has two versions or two forms of each photon art, or at least most of its photon arts. I didn't play Luster that much, I was Tector Luster, so I was OG Gunblade. But essentially, if you're not holding a direction, the photon art will function differently than holding a direction. So I'm gonna rewind this just a little bit, slow it down. So the first thing we see is likely the move art version. And then of course, in this next clip, the stay art. What you have noticed in that first PA, there is a travel distance. Slayer kind of teleports before it does the attack, but in this stay art version, they stay in place, does a slash into a shoot. And of course, in this next clip or this next scene, you're gonna see that in action. So let's break it down. Move art coming, that's the move. Shoot. Here comes the stay. Shoot. Now, what's going on here? Notice the purple flash that occurs after that first sequence of move and stay art rotations. It's quick, so that's why we slowed this down and I froze it here on purpose. What does this animation look like? Look at the Slayer pose, look at the gun, where it's positioned, look at the arm. Same animation as what I referred to earlier as quick shoot. So what I think is happening is that you can access quick shoot via the normals, 1, 2, 3, charge, quick shoot. But if you do it during a PA, and we'll get into where you can execute this, you can skip through that first phase of the charge and go straight into that final phase. And so even though it was quick, and we'll get back to it, even though this is quick, you might be able to charge for additional damage. And now I might be jumping the gun a bit, but I do think that this is going to be one of Slayer's main PP regeneration capabilities. And so as you're doing all your photon arts, you're doing all this damage, you're trying to manage PP, this is probably going to be one of the things you're going to have to focus on and understand how to use effectively so that you're not burning through PP to do higher damage. I know I'm jumping the gun, no pun intended, but when we get into the next PA, you're going to see why this might be important. The other thing I want to call out though is why I also think this is quick shoot in the same attack that we saw earlier in the video. Right here. Once again, now after doing the quick shoot, he follows up with another move art that he goes into a stay art, but of course the doll dies before the stay art's able to hit. But notice this horizontal visual effect. Stay art, horizontal visual effect, goes away, but then during the move art, it reappears. This is also something that Luster had. This was essentially the visual indicator for quick shoot or quick slash. Luster technically had two versions. I'm not too sure Slayer is going to have quick slash because of how quick slash functioned with Luster. It played off the different elemental styles of your gun blade. Right now, we don't know, but of course that could be something that's coming, if there's going to be a style type mechanic for Slayer. And so there might not be a quick slash, but as you notice, this visual indicator appears during the photon arts, both move and stay, which then goes away when they go into quick shoot. So I think what's happening here is that when you're using a photon art, you'll see that visual indicator and you have times either during or after the execution of a photon art to where then you can input whatever that command is to get quick shoot. So now let's move on to the second PA. And now the second PA has a lot going on. So we're going to definitely break this down. Let's go. Once again, the second photon art has move, stay art properties. And so what we're going to see in the first clip is what I believe to be the move version, even though he doesn't move. When we get into him actually attacking enemies, he does. But two quick slashes. Now let's look at the stay version that's coming up. Two slashes, a third. Now, this is where things get tricky, because even though we see three slashes in the sequence, I still believe that the stay version of this photon art also has two slashes, similar to the move. And yes, you're probably saying, but we saw three. And you're right, we did see three. And this is where we have to look closely of what's going on with this stay art version of this photon art. And what I want you to do when I rewind this and play this is look at the gun. Specifically, look at where the Slayer's hand is on the gun. This is where I want you to focus when I rewind this back. Here comes the stay. One slash. Two slash, three slash, right? What do we notice? Right here, it's quick and you can miss it, but there is a purple glow around the base of the gun where the Slayer's hand is positioned. What I believe is happening here is that this is Slayer's focus meter, or for you Final Fantasy XIV gunbreakers, these are your cartridges that allow enhanced PAs. Now for those who played Luster, enhanced PAs was also a Luster mechanic. What was that? Essentially, if you were to press and hold a photon art, you will not only do the original photon art, but you will do an enhanced version, or do an additional attack or additional step for what was known as focus meter. So if you had focus meter and you held the PA, you would do what is called an enhanced PA. If you didn't have focus meter, you would not. So as we notice, I'm going to play this back again, but now that we notice that this purple glow is here, notice how it appears and vanishes at different points of this attack sequence. So what I think is happening is that this sequence is not one long photon art. In actuality, it might be 2 to 3 attacks that are chained together, requiring focus meter to execute. So you can imagine where kind of, for those who played Final Fantasy VIII, the OG gunblade essentially, when you played as Squall, when you attacked, if you hit either, it's a PlayStation controller, R2 or L2, I forget, at the right time, you would trigger an explosion. Like you would use a bullet, it would do additional damage. That was kind of one of the mini games of the game. And so essentially, it seems like that's what they're going for here, which was similar to Luster, but it might be just a little more nuanced in its purpose, given that NGS combat system is a little more simplified in the grand scheme of things. Granted, this is where I think PP becomes a big issue for Slayers. And this is where quick shoot plays a very vital role. Because I think one of the things we're going to probably have to do as Slayer is balance building up focus meter, keeping consistent damage while also maintaining your PP. This second Photon Art is probably a heavy damage dealer, which is going to take a lot of PP, but also focus. And you're going to need to rebuild and maintain that focus, and the best way to probably do that is going to be your Photon Arts. And so that's probably where the first Photon Art comes in, because it's very, very quick. It does quick damage, it allows you to access quick shoot quickly. It's that back and forth of balancing and building focus, burning focus, making sure your PP is able to do that and you're not losing damage because you're running out. So normal attacks is probably going to be a weak point for Slayers, and PP management is also going to be potentially a weak point for Slayers, where all of these mechanics are going to play in. But now let's look at the second Photon Art, understanding that, hey, we now understand that quick shoot probably exists. We know the visual indicator. We're seeing indications of potentially a focus meter or bullet cartridges, whatever they want to call it. Let's see how it looks like when you're actually attacking enemies. Move art version. Oh, there's the horizontal quick shoot. Then we get to stay art. We see our focus meter. We see our focus meter again. Another thing I want to call out, how not only does what I'm calling the focus indicator reappear and disappear, but also the quick shoot, that horizontal line across the body, it appearing and reappearing, which indicates that different attacks are happening. And that even though this looks like one chain, this is actually potentially 2 to 3, maybe even more attacks using different mechanics of Slayer that are being chained together to do this damage. So let me rewind this again, and now let's start once again from the beginning, and we'll play all the way through, and we'll get into the third Photon Art. Move. Stay. Focus. Focus again. Into the finisher. Now, grenades. There's the move variation. You kick the grenade. The stay, you toss the grenade. And it also looks like in the stay version, we get a guard mechanic, or at least we get guard frames. I say guard mechanic, I have to be careful because sometimes that can be misconstrued as, oh, it's a counter or it does other things. It at least has guard frame. What I will say, and of course now this is really just theory because we won't know until we know, that this might be the only guard mechanic that Slayer has access to, which could be another weak point of the class. That being, it doesn't have a counter other than step counter or a step dodge counter. What's great about this is you could insert something like a rifle weapon action grenade. So like if you wanted to do Slayer Ranger or Ranger Slayer, this might be a perfect indication of like, hey, this is where instead of using this Photon Art, I can slip in the rifle weapon action. Because for those who don't know, Ranger Rifle Grenade is very powerful given its recent updates and buffs. But for us Tectors, I can also see myself saying, hey, this is where Juan Perry has an opportunity to work with Slayer. We'll get into that a little bit. Now, what do I think this Photon Art is all about? I think it's very, very simple. The move version kicks a grenade, the stay version, you throw a grenade, you kind of go backwards, creates a shield. So this Photon Art is probably focusing on more defensive, but also a repositioning tool, especially since step counters are generally weak in the air where you'll lose altitude. Even though we're going to see the next Photon Art, there's ways of regaining that altitude. This allows you to quickly, do your Photon Arts. Oh, I'm in this tricky situation. I need to reposition. I'm too close. I'm not in the right spot. Let me use the stay version of the grenades to blow myself back, but also create a shield. The other interesting thing is that this is probably an AoE and has mobbing capability. So this could be a tool to build that focus meter that we saw being used or potentially being used in that second Photon Art. What's interesting here is that there is no quick shoot indication in any of these clips. So we'll see him actually attacking enemies. And now, does that mean that there is no quick shoot for this photon art? Not sure. What could be happening is they forgot to add the skill. Quick shoot is likely a Slayer skill that you have to put a point into, and for these clips, they just didn't. So once again, we start seeing the synergies and how these different photon arts start covering potential weak points. I think for this is not going to be one of your main damage dealers, but you never know. There might be an enhanced power version if you use the guard frames effectively. But what I think is going to happen here is that, hey, this is a great defensive option because Slayer might not have many. It's a great repositioning tool because it pushes you away just in case you need to create space. It might also be great of saying, hey, I need to build focus meter. If these grenades hit multiple enemies, that's how much focus I'm going to get. And now let's focus on the fourth photon art. Now this one I'm actually going to give a name because it's very similar to what Luster has, even though they weren't technically photon arts, they were other abilities, but very similar in nature. And that is the first one, which I am going to call, in this case, Gunblade Climb, which is likely either the move or the stay version. Not too sure. Probably the stay, even though the way that the video's been doing their ordering, move goes first, stay goes second. But either way, that's not really an issue. And then the other version, which we'll call Gunblade Fall. And so essentially this is what Luster had in PSO2 base. It functioned a little differently, especially with the Gunblade Fall. Depending on your health and how you used it, you could trigger things like Megaverse or Zonverse. It'll give you additional damage or properties based on the health of your enemy. Once again, I didn't play Luster that much, so I don't want to go too far into it, but there are guides out there. You read into it, you look at how I'm assessing this video, you'll see those parallels. Very straightforward, nothing really special here other than Slayer has a way to quickly ascend or climb an enemy. So if we're fighting like the Daedals or an enemy that's in the air, you don't necessarily have to use your second jump. You have ability to climb, and when you need to crash to the ground, you have Gunblade Fall, which once again could be an interesting focus meter building capability. Similar to Wave Crash, if you've got a bunch of enemies in proximity, this thing is likely going to hit all of them. And so most likely the more enemies you hit, the more focus meter you might be building. Once again, these clips did not have that visual quick shoot indicator, but it might just be that they forgot to turn the skill on. Who knows? We'll find out in a couple of weeks. And that's all for the photon art. So let's get into the active ability. Now, of course, the sound is off, but if you listen to this full speed with the sound on, you'll notice that this is likely an active ability because we can hear the sub palette being activated during this clip, but of course I'm not having any sound. So chances are this is an active ability. There's probably some cooldown. There's probably gonna need to be built up via damage, similar to a Pinion Blade, similar to Wand Element Revoke, and kind of all those other skills, even though technically Wand Element Revoke does not have a cooldown, but it requires damage to build up and it has some conditions. What'll be interesting if this also requires focus meter. And so this kind of gets into the mini game as well. Hey, I have to manage my PP, I have to constantly build focus, and I have to make a decision. Do I burn focus on an enhanced PA, or do I save it because I have this active ability coming up? The next ability that we're gonna see is probably gonna give some indication of why that might be the case. Overall, very straightforward. In this clip, we see a step counter, which might be, once again, this might be the only counter that Slayer has. And so a lot of their abilities are going to be focused on their PAs and using this focus meter. But then after the step counter, we get into the active ability, which interestingly is almost Wand Element Revoke, but in reverse. So it's like you can imagine using Wand Element Revoke, hitting rewind on the tape, and essentially you get this animation. So once again, if Tector, Slayer, or Tesla, if they do function well together, we get combos like Wand Element Revoke that pushes you away from the enemy, and then you go back in, essentially hitting rewind with this active ability. Now, we talked about focus meter might be something that this active ability needs to activate, and this gets into the next ability, which I'm going to call Slayer Time. Now, why do I call this Slayer Time? Because I think this is identical to the ability that Luster had, which was Luster Time. And so in PSO2, after activating Luster Time, it would do a little burst damage if you're close enough, but really what you would get during that time was damage reduction, and I think it was 30%, not too sure, but I think you got 30% damage reduction. You also got 200% PP regeneration, so when you're attacking, you get a lot of PP, and it would restore your focus meter. Why I think this is probably the case, because my theory is that Slayer, one of its weak points, is going to have a hard time managing PP. And so when you activate Slayer Time, you're getting that 200% PP regeneration on attacks and maybe even natural, and you're getting that focus meter restored. Because once again, your PAs, your PP are going to building focus meter, so you can consistently keep high damage. This gives you the ability to essentially restore that, which allows you to do more enhanced PAs, like the second PA we saw in that sequence, but also likely that active ability. In addition to Luster Time, after you've activated the ability, if you activate the ability again, it does a finisher. So this is why I believe that Slayer Time is probably, even though the numbers might be different, identical, or at least it functions similarly to Luster Time. And then of course, we have the next ability after we get through Luster Time, or excuse me, Slayer Time, which is the Photon Blast. Other than it being a nice, pretty cool visual effect, which I hope in Ultra Evolution, maybe they think about giving other classes more improved visual effects, what have you, when they're doing things like Photon Blast. Not really changing the camera. I don't need camera dynamics. That just gets counterproductive, but this dome and these visual effects are very nice. But other than that, it's just a Photon Blast, pretty much. And so, what are my overall thoughts? To be completely honest, when I first saw the trailer during that headline, I wasn't super excited. And that wasn't because I was like, oh, this class doesn't look great. It was just that I didn't feel like Tector Luster was going to be a thing. And given that Tector Luster was meta for Tectors at the very, very end of PSO2 base, I figured that it would carry into NGS just because literally when we're talking about timing, it was a thing that they purposely did. You figure that, okay, they're going to keep doing that because it just made sense. It was a thing that most Tectors gravitated toward. But it looks like after breaking this down that I'm actually more excited because Tector Luster, aka Tector Slayer, aka Tesla, and yes, once again, that's going to be a thing. My videos are probably going to surge in search volume because people looking for Tesla videos potentially might come across this video, so that's gonna be great. But now I feel like there's more opportunities to where Tector Luster might be a thing. Based on this breakdown and based on my theory, we have a couple of weak points for Slayer. That is, they have weak normals, which for Wand is a plus because technically Wand has good normals. It doesn't have a counter, potentially. Of course, we don't know that for sure, but based on what we've seen, it doesn't seem like they have a counter mechanic. They may have a guard mechanic through grenades, but no actual counterattack other than a step counter. Once again, that's great for Wand because Wand has a great counterattack mechanism that requires normal attacks. So if I don't need to worry about Slayer's normals, I can replace that with Wand normals. And if Slayer doesn't have a counterattack, that's where Wand parry plays. And so now not only can I have a counter that builds PP, it also builds things like Revoke. So there's a synergy there to where I still have the ability to build Revoke, which is not a main class skill. Wand element Revoke, and most of Wand's skills aren't main class, so you could even go Slayer Tector potentially and not lose out on too much other than those bonus damage differences. So that's great. It recovers PP, it gives me a counter, and it still builds Wand's most powerful ability outside of Photon Blast and Compounds. But of course, Wand element Revoke also builds Compounds. But where does Wand suffer? Maybe not suffer is not the right word, but where does it struggle? Then that is the Photon Art. What does Slayer have a lot of? Photon Arts. And what are those Photon Arts for? Doing consistent damage, building focus meter, using that focus meter for enhanced PAs. And so once again, okay, I can swap out my Wand Photon Arts, put in the Slayer Photon Arts, build that focus meter, making sure that I'm not burning through my PP because I have Wand counter. And now I'm synergistically building focus meter for the active ability. I'm synergistically building Wand meter for Wand element revokes and compound techniques. Even though they're not going to build as fast, still having those capabilities. Now, of course, the question will be, what are the main class? What are the subclass skills for Slayer? So some of this might just be locked. Like Slayer time might be something that's locked. That active ability might be something that's locked, which is fine. You know, there's gonna be some trade-offs, but if not, there's a lot of synergy. And so my expectations are that for subclasses, Ranger's definitely going to get a glow up. I think when we saw the grenades, we were like, oh, well, Ranger has better grenades, so I should just use Ranger grenade. But to the extent Ranger also suffers, and I say that loosely, given its photon arts, because you have to have great positioning, there's a lot of setup. And so there might just be indication to where it's like, hey, Gunblade gives Ranger the ability to kind of reduce that level of setup, but still having those abilities to go back and forth. Tector isn't going to get as much of a glow up just because it's not range-based damage, so you're going to have some hybrid combinations and some sacrifices you'll need to make. But there are spots to where the weaknesses of Wand look like they can be covered by Slayer, and the potential weaknesses of Slayer can be covered by Wand, and so there's synergies there where you can actually leverage both weapons. We're not going to get into this fake Tector fighter situation or fake Tector braver situation where you're not really using Wand, you're just using fighter subclass to exploit double saber, to exploit katana. And so that is it for this assessment. Let me know your thoughts, where you think I might have missed something, where you think I'm on the money, or this helps you kind of see things differently. We've got a little bit over a month. They said mid-April, but it's weird. Everything changes, or all of the events leading up to Slayer end on April 4th. So we'll see what they actually mean by mid-April. And other than that, I will catch you all next time.